In 2010, there was this young, incredibly brash company out of Chicago, and they received a phone call that would effectively define the career of every single executive in the building.
Oh, yeah, the Google call.
The Google call, exactly.
Hmm.
On the other end of the line was Google, and they were offering a staggering $6 billion to acquire them. Keep in mind, this company had only existed for, what, about 2 years?
Right, barely 2 years. It's almost unheard of.
It is extraordinary. And the founders, incredibly, said no. They just rejected the $6 billion outright. And the market actually applauded their audacity. A year later, they go public at a $10 billion valuation.
Hmm.
I mean, they became the fastest internet business in history to reach unicorn status.
Yeah, and at the time, the momentum just felt completely unstoppable. I mean, they had tens of millions of active users, thousands of employees, and a brand name that had, practically become a verb overnight.
Oh, right.
Investors were totally convinced this company had cracked the code for a permanent, impenetrable monopoly on local commerce.
But the market was suffering from a rather massive optical illusion, wasn't it? Fast forward just 24 months, and that $10 billion valuation had completely evaporated.
Poof, gone.
Gone. The stock had lost 80% of its value. The charismatic CEO was abruptly forced out. They were shuttering international operations at an alarming rate. The company, as I'm sure you sitting at home have guessed, was Groupon.
Yep, Groupon.
And the fundamental question that their spectacular rise and fall poses is really the holy grail of our discussion today. So welcome to this session of the Pocket MBA. We are tackling the ultimate boardroom mystery. Why do some firms consistently generate outsized returns and build impenetrable fortresses, while others operating in the exact same industry, with the exact same access to capital, just collapse into obscurity?
It really is the defining puzzle for any general manager. I mean, you can place two competing businesses on opposite corners of the exact same intersection, right? They sell virtually identical products to the same demographic, they rely on the same global supply chains, and face the exact same macroeconomic headwinds.
Right, the environment is identical.
Exactly. Yet one compounds its capital year after year, while the other slowly bleeds to death. And the traditional models of business strategy really struggle to explain that divergence.
Which means we need to completely recalibrate how we evaluate a business. If you, as our listener, are sitting in an executive suite right now or preparing to enter one, your instinct is almost always to look out the window. For decades, the entire discipline of corporate strategy was essentially just an exercise in environmental surveillance.
Yeah, that outward-looking perspective totally dominated the 1970s and 1980s. The prevailing wisdom back then dictated that your profitability was largely determined by the neighborhood you chose to live in, basically.
The industry structure.
Right. If you operated in an industry with high barriers to entry, weak suppliers, and, fragmented buyers, you were destined to be profitable. Strategy was simply a matter of selecting the right industry and defending your position within it.
The classic external analysis. We all learn to run those models, analyzing the bargaining power of buyers, the threat of substitutes. But relying solely on that environmental scan creates a rather massive intellectual blind spot.
Sure.
It is akin to spending all of your time, all of your analytical energy, meticulously choosing the absolute perfect ocean to sail in. You map the prevailing winds, you study the lunar tides, you chart the commercial shipping lanes.
But you're missing the ship itself.
Spot on. You do all of this without ever once venturing below deck to check if your own ship has a gaping hole in the hull, or evaluating if your crew has the faintest idea how to hoist a sail.
That analogy perfectly highlights the specific flaw in those early models. They relied on two incredibly dangerous, simplifying assumptions about the ships themselves. First, they assumed that all firms competing within a specific industry were effectively identical.
Identical. That seems incredibly naive.
It was. They operated on the premise that everyone possessed the exact same basic toolkit.
So the assumption was that a legacy automaker in Detroit and a nimble startup in Silicon Valley, assuming they are both building electric vehicles, are drawing from the same fundamental pool of capabilities. They both have money, they both have engineers, they both buy steel.
Exactly. And the assumption went even further than that. Not only did they assume firms possessed identical resources, but they also assumed those resources were perfectly mobile.
Mobile, meaning you could just buy them off the shelf.
Right. Meaning, if a company somehow stumbled upon a unique advantage, say, a highly efficient new manufacturing process, that advantage would be entirely fleeting. The logic dictated that competitors could simply observe the success, walk into the open market and purchase the exact same machinery, hire the exact same consultants, and immediately replicate it.
It assumes a perfectly frictionless world, a world where capital can buy anything, instantly. But anyone who has ever actually tried to manage human beings or integrate two different corporate cultures knows that frictionless mobility is an absolute academic fantasy.
Hmm.
You cannot just cut a check and instantly replicate the operational tempo of a world-class competitor.
No, you definitely can't. And that realization sparked a fundamental paradigm shift in the mid-1980s. We've got a great stack of source material today covering this, starting with Berger Wernerfeld's foundational 1984 paper, moving through Jay Barney's seminal 1991 work, all the way to a massive 2021 meta-analysis by Doria and colleagues.
A veritable treasure trove of strategic insight.
It really is, and Wernerfeld was the one who kicked off this shift. Rather than analyzing the external market to find a profitable product, he argued that we needed to look inward at the firm itself. The premise was totally inverted.
Right. Instead of asking what products we should sell based on the market, we ask what?
We ask, what unique underlying resources do we possess, and what products can those resources uniquely support?
And that inversion is the bedrock of what we now call the resource-based view of the firm, or the RBV. It proposes that products and resources are intimately linked, almost like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. If you observe the products a company dominates, you can effectively reverse engineer the minimum resources they must possess. But far more importantly for you as a manager, if you rigorously audit your own internal resource profile, you can systematically dictate which new markets you have the right to win.
Fascinating. And this internal audit reveals a concept known as a resource position barrier. Yes. We are all familiar with market entry barriers, regulatory red tape, massive capital requirements, brand monopolies. But a resource position barrier is far more insidious.
It is. It occurs when your firm possesses a specific capability, and the sheer fact that you own it makes it disproportionately expensive or difficult for a rival to develop it.
So it acts as a self-reinforcing moat. The further ahead you get in developing a specific internal capability, the steeper the climb becomes for anyone trying to follow you.
Yeah, and that moat offers a critical layer of protection that a simple product barrier does not. Imagine you absolutely dominate the market for a specific consumer electronic device. You have a massive product entry barrier.
Right. No one can touch my device.
Right. But a competitor operating in an entirely different industry has spent the last decade building an unparalleled world-class capability in miniaturized battery technology. If they decide to pivot, they can use their superior underlying resource to crash right through your product barrier and steal your market share.
Because they possess the foundational engine that powers the next generation of the product. That is terrifying if you are on the receiving end.
But conversely, if you are the firm holding that world-class battery technology team, the resource position barrier, your strategic options are just vast.
You are immune to product death.
Basically, yeah. Even if consumer tastes shift and your current product becomes totally obsolete, you don't go bankrupt. You simply pivot the engineering team. You point that deeply entrenched resource at a new product category. The capability survives the death of the product.
That implies a radically different approach to corporate growth and diversification. It completely validates the concept of a stepping stone strategy. If you view your company merely as a portfolio of products, you evaluate expansion solely on short-term financial returns.
Right, which is short-sighted.
Indeed. But if you view your company as a portfolio of evolving resources, you start evaluating new markets based on whether they help you build a bridge to a much larger future capability.
The historical rise of the Japanese technology sector provides the absolute textbook application of the stepping stone strategy. In the 1970s and 80s, giants like NEC, Toshiba, and Hitachi didn't attempt to attack established Western monopolies in complex mainframe computers head-on.
They didn't just storm the IBM castle.
No, they knew they lacked the comprehensive bundle of resources required to survive a direct assault against IBM.
They lacked the software ecosystems, the massive enterprise sales forces, the specific microprocessing architecture. It would have been a suicide mission.
Exactly. So they utilized a stepping stone. They identified a smaller adjacent market, memory chips, specifically DRAM. The manufacturing of memory chips required a subset of capabilities they already possessed.
Namely, extreme precision engineering and relentless quality control on assembly lines.
Right, so they poured their focus into dominating memory chips.
They weren't just building chips to sell chips, they were building chips to build an institutional muscle.
Exactly. That institutional muscle became their resource position barrier. By mastering the high-yield, low-defect manufacturing of memory chips, they accumulated vast internal knowledge. And once that manufacturing capability was secured and generating cash flow, they used it as a bridge.
A stepping stone.
Right. They stepped from memory chips into microprocessors, from microprocessors into consumer electronics, and finally, armed with this formidable, tested arsenal of capabilities, they stepped directly into the complex computer market.
It is a masterclass in strategic patience. They constructed the underlying resource engine over a decade, fully aware that the final product dominance would inevitably follow. But let me challenge that premise for a moment, if I may.
Go for it.
If I am sitting on a massive corporate war chest, why should I exercise a decade of strategic patience? Why bother painstakingly cultivating a resource internally? If I realize I need a world-class artificial intelligence engineering team to compete tomorrow, shouldn't I just bypass the stepping stone, walk into the open market, and acquire an AI startup? I can buy the resource on Tuesday and deploy it on Wednesday.
Well, that assumes the market for buying and selling entire companies operates with perfect efficiency and total transparency. And the reality of mergers and acquisitions is that it is arguably the most imperfect, opaque market in the corporate world.
I suppose that's true. The target company is always going to paint the rosiest possible picture in the data room.
Yeah, but it goes even deeper than intentional deception. It's phenomenally difficult for an acquiring firm to look beneath the hood and identify which specific resources are actually driving the target's success.
Ah, yes. Are they succeeding because of their proprietary software, or are they succeeding because their sales director happens to be best friends with their 3 largest clients?
Exactly. Furthermore, you have no reliable way to calculate the true friction costs of integrating their resources with yours. You're not just acquiring a line of code or a patent portfolio, you're acquiring the messy, unquantifiable human dynamics.
In the informal networks, the unwritten cultural rules, the tacit knowledge of the employees.
Right, you just cannot put a precise valuation multiple on a culture. And because of that extreme ambiguity, a specific target company will represent wildly different values to different prospective buyers.
Which highlights a profound shift in M&A strategy through the resource-based lens. The goal is not merely financial engineering.
No, the goal is to aggressively exploit that market imperfection by basing your acquisitions on a unique, rare resource you already possess that acts as a perfect complement to the target's missing capabilities.
So we're looking for asymmetric synergy. Give me a hypothetical scenario of how that plays out in a bidding war.
Okay, imagine you command an unparalleled, highly entrenched global physical distribution and logistics network. You have warehouses and supply lines in every major territory on Earth.
An absolute logistical behemoth.
Exactly. And you identify a mid-sized consumer goods startup that has developed a brilliant disruptive product line, but they're entirely domestic. They have zero international distribution capability and lack the capital to build it.
Right. Now, if a private equity firm bids on that startup, they are only valuing the company based on its current domestic cash flows.
But to you, the strategic buyer with the global logistics network, that target is worth exponentially more. You can immediately plug their brilliant product into your existing global pipelines.
Instantly multiplying their revenue without having to build a single new warehouse?
Right. Because your underlying resource perfectly complements their deficiency, you can afford to significantly outbid the private equity firm, win the deal, and still pay far less than the ultimate value you will extract.
Brilliant. But the entire strategy hinges on a brutally honest understanding of your own unique resource position first. You have to know what your logistical network is actually worth. Which brings us to the theoretical foundation that proves why certain resources matter more than others.
Yes, the Barney 1991 paper.
Quite right. If the 1980s introduced the idea of looking inward at resources, it was J. Barney in the early 1990s who provided the rigorous academic proof of how those resources generate sustained dominance.
And the formalization of this entire field rests on 2 foundational assumptions about the nature of corporate resources. And these 2 assumptions serve as a direct, aggressive refutation of those old, outward-looking environmental models we talked about.
The perfect ocean model.
Exactly. The first assumption is resource heterogeneity. It posits the seemingly self-evident truth that firms, even those competing ferociously in the exact same market, possess fundamentally different bundles of resources.
We are not identical ships. A 100-year-old multinational banking conglomerate and a 5-year-old fintech startup might both offer checking accounts, but their internal resource bundles, their legacy tech debt, their regulatory relationships, their internal risk cultures are totally alien to one another.
They're entirely heterogeneous. And the second assumption is resource immobility. This argues that these differing resource bundles are highly sticky. Sticky. They're deeply embedded within the firm and cannot be easily severed, bought, sold, or transplanted into a competitor's organization without losing significant value.
That effectively destroys the idea of frictionless mobility. You cannot just throw $50 million at a headhunter and expect to instantly transplant your rival's innovative culture into your own sterile corporate headquarters.
Right. If all resources were perfectly mobile, competitive advantage would be mathematically impossible to sustain. The moment a firm discovered a highly profitable new capability, every rival would simply purchase the identical inputs, and the resulting price war would instantly compete the excess profits away.
It is the very immobility, the sheer stubborn stickiness of certain resources that allows an advantage to endure.
Exactly.
So we established that firms are vastly different, and those differences are incredibly difficult to transfer. But the term resource is dangerously broad. If I am an executive trying to catalog my firm's advantages, what exactly am I looking for? How do we categorize the assets that actually matter?
The literature groups these strategically relevant assets into three broad categories. The first is physical capital. This encompasses the tangible physical technology utilized by the firm. It's the geographic footprint, the manufacturing plants, the proprietary access to raw materials, the server farms.
It is the lithium mine situated strategically close to the battery plant or the prime retail corner on Fifth Avenue. It is the hard, observable infrastructure.
The second category is human capital, and this must be distinguished from simple headcount. Human capital represents the deeply ingrained training, the accumulated experience, the judgment, the intelligence, and the specific interpersonal relationships of the individual managers and workers within the firm.
I see. So it is the difference between having 500 generic software developers and having a tight-knit core of 20 engineers who have spent a decade solving complex problems together, who implicitly trust each other's code, and who can communicate entirely in shorthand.
Exactly that. And that leads directly to the third and arguably the most impenetrable category, organizational capital. This represents the connective tissue of the enterprise.
Connective tissue.
Yeah, it encompasses the formal reporting structures, the intricate planning and controlling systems, but more importantly, the informal, unwritten relations among groups within the firm and between the firm and its external environment.
It is the culture. It is the informal routines. It is the way the marketing team and the R&D team actually speak to each other in the cafeteria rather than what the organizational chart dictates.
Exactly.
So we have physical, human, and organizational capital. We understand they are heterogeneous and sticky. But understanding the theory does not automatically generate a strategic plan. If an executive is tasked with auditing their company on a Tuesday morning, they need a diagnostic mechanism to separate the truly strategic capabilities from the everyday operational noise.
And bridging that gap between high-level theory and boardroom execution requires a systematic framework. That framework, which serves as the diagnostic engine for the resource-based view, is universally known by its acronym VRIO.
The VRIO. This framework is the absolute fulcrum of our discussion today.
It really is. It's a sequential decision tree designed to ruthlessly interrogate every capability within a firm to determine if it truly yields a sustainable competitive advantage.
Right. But before we submit a company to this interrogation, we must establish a precise vocabulary. When managers sit down to catalog their strengths, they frequently conflate what they own with what they actually do.
Oh, all the time.
We need to sharply define the distinction between resources and capabilities, as well as the divide between the tangible and the intangible.
So the distinction between resources and capabilities is best understood through grammar, actually. Resources are the nouns of the business. They represent what the organization owns or controls. Cash reserves, physical machinery, real estate, patents, and brand trademarks, those are all resources.
Nouns, the raw ingredients in the pantry.
Exactly. Capabilities, conversely, are the verbs. They describe what the organization actually does with those nouns. Capabilities are the complex, deeply embedded processes, routines, and accumulated learning that allow a firm to deploy its resources efficiently.
Let me test that distinction. A state-of-the-art robotic assembly line is a resource. It is a noun. But the ability to operate that assembly line at a lower defect rate than anyone else in the industry, while simultaneously maintaining exceptionally high worker morale on the factory floor, that is a capability. It is the verb. It is the execution.
Perfect example. Furthermore, consumers do not directly reward companies simply for possessing resources. Nobody purchases an electric vehicle just because the manufacturer happens to have a massive cash hoard sitting in a treasury account or a shiny, architecturally stunning corporate headquarters.
No, of course not.
Right. Consumers pay for the capability, the firm's ability to bundle that cash and human capital to engineer a car with a longer range and a better user interface.
The value is created in the deployment, not the possession. Now, overlay the concepts of tangible versus intangible onto this.
So tangible resources are easily observable, quantifiable, and easily valued on a balance sheet. Buildings, cash, standardized equipment. Intangible resources and capabilities are invisible. They include brand reputation, corporate culture, intellectual property, and the tacit knowledge of the workforce.
And the unavoidable conclusion from the literature is that if you are searching for a truly sustainable advantage, you will almost never find it in the tangible column.
Never. Because tangible assets are inherently mobile. If your entire competitive edge relies on a specific, commercially available piece of manufacturing equipment or a large marketing budget, any well-capitalized competitor can simply call the same vendor, buy the same machine, and match your ad spend.
Tangible assets can be neutralized with cash.
Exactly. You cannot, however, use cash to instantly purchase a 50-year reputation for uncompromising safety or an organizational culture that naturally fosters rapid, decentralized decision-making.
The intangibles are where the fortresses are built.
Yeah.
Right, we have our vocabulary, we understand the difference between the ingredients and the recipe. Imagine I am a division manager. I have identified a specific capability my team excels at. Perhaps it is our rapid product prototyping process. I need to run it through the VRIO decision tree. What is the very first diagnostic question I must confront?
The sequence begins with the letter V, which stands for valuable. You must ruthlessly ask, is this specific capability actually valuable to the firm? And in strategic terms, valuable is not a subjective measure of pride.
It's not just something we think is neat.
Right. A capability is only valuable if it performs one of two specific economic functions. It must either empower the firm to significantly increase the perceived value of its products in the eyes of the consumer, allowing for premium pricing, or it must empower the firm to significantly lower its underlying costs of production.
That distinction eliminates a tremendous amount of corporate vanity. Managers frequently fall in love with a highly complex, unique internal process, assuming it is a strategic advantage simply because it is difficult to execute.
Oh, absolutely.
But if that prototyping process yields a product with features the customer refuses to pay a premium for, and it does not reduce operational costs, it is completely devoid of strategic value.
It might actually be a liability, draining time and capital. A capability must also enable the firm to proactively exploit an external market opportunity or aggressively neutralize an external threat. Consider the global furniture giant, IKEA.
Let's run them through it.
They possess a deeply entrenched, almost fanatical organizational capability for cost-conscious design and supply chain logistics.
Their engineers do not design a beautiful chair and then figure out how to ship it. They start by determining the exact dimensions of a flat-pack shipping container and then design a chair that perfectly fits those constraints to eliminate dead air in transit.
Exactly. That capability directly lowers their costs on a massive global scale. It is undeniably valuable because it allows them to exploit a massive external opportunity: the global demand for well-designed, functional furniture at entry-level prices.
If a manager runs a capability through this first hurdle and realizes it does not increase willingness to pay, does not lower costs, and neutralizes no threats, what is the strategic diagnosis?
The diagnosis is a competitive disadvantage. The firm is expending resources to maintain an asset or a routine that actively hinders its economic performance. The strategic mandate is to immediately divest, outsource, or correct it.
A harsh but necessary reality check. Let us assume my prototyping capability passes the test. It significantly lowers our time to market, which reduces costs. It is highly valuable. What is the second hurdle?
The letter R is the capability rare. You must scan the competitive landscape and ask how many rival firms already possess this exact same valuable capability.
This is where the baseline requirements of an industry are stripped away from true strategic advantages. Because an enormous number of capabilities are incredibly valuable, but absolutely ubiquitous.
Take the digital payment infrastructure of a modern e-commerce retailer. Is the capability to securely process a credit card transaction online valuable? Unquestionably. If a retailer loses that capability for an hour, they lose millions in revenue. But is that capability rare?
Not at all. Every single competitor, from a massive conglomerate down to a teenager selling vintage clothing out of a garage, possesses secure digital payment processing.
Right. When a capability is highly valuable but entirely common across the industry, it results in competitive parity. These are categorized as threshold capabilities or qualifiers.
It is the steering wheel in a Formula One race car. It is undeniably valuable. You will crash immediately without one, but possessing a steering wheel does not guarantee you'll win the race, because every other driver on the grid also has one. It merely qualifies you to enter the track.
Exactly. To generate an advantage that elevates you above the pack, the capability must be scarce. It must be held by few, or ideally no other competitors.
So my rapid prototyping capability is valuable, and I confirm through industry intelligence that none of my competitors possess this specific high-speed methodology.
Yeah.
It is rare. I have passed VNR. Can I finally assure the board that we have an impenetrable advantage?
You can assure the board that you have an advantage today. But if your capability is demonstrably valuable, and it is rare, it is going to act as a massive beacon to every competitor in the market.
They will see the outsized profits it generates.
And they will immediately mobilize to acquire it. This forces you into the most rigorous and complex phase of the VRIO framework. The letter I. Is the capability costly to imitate?
Let me stop you there, because this is where the theory collides violently with modern corporate reality. If I am sitting on a board, I am deeply skeptical of the word inimitable.
Fair enough.
We operate in an era of unprecedented industrial espionage. We have aggressive corporate headhunters whose sole purpose is to poach visionary executives and brilliant engineers. We have tear-down labs that reverse engineer hardware down to the microscopic level. If a competitor has a market capitalization of $1 trillion and an unlimited R&D budget, I struggle to believe anything is truly impossible for them to copy. Capital conquers all friction, doesn't it?
That skepticism is entirely warranted, and it touches on the absolute core vulnerability of corporate strategy. If a competitor can easily replicate your capability or find an equivalent strategic substitute, your advantage is purely temporary.
Right.
However, the theoretical framework identifies 3 specific structural barriers to imitation. 3 reasons why a competitor, even armed with limitless capital and aggressive poachers, will fundamentally fail to replicate your advantage.
I want to dissect each of these barriers, because this is the defensive moat every company is trying to build. What is the first barrier to imitation?
The first barrier is path dependency. This principle dictates that certain capabilities are inextricably linked to the unique, historical trajectory of the firm. They were forged over a long period of time under specific, unrepeatable historical conditions.
So history is a resource. You cannot manufacture hindsight or accelerate the passage of time.
Exactly. The definitive corporate illustration of path dependency is Southwest Airlines, specifically their renowned organizational culture of high-energy customer service, extreme frugality, and fierce employee loyalty. It is a culture that has allowed them to consistently generate profits in an industry famous for catastrophic bankruptcies.
But to my earlier point, why can't a legacy carrier like United or Delta simply observe that success, hire an elite management consulting firm, rewrite their corporate value statement, implement profit sharing, host employee appreciation events, and effectively clone the Southwest culture?
Because the Southwest culture was not designed in a boardroom seminar. It is path-dependent, born out of a desperate struggle for survival in the early 1970s. When Rollin King and Herb Kelleher founded the airline, the established carriers, Braniff and Texas International, launched a barrage of legal injunctions that literally kept Southwest's planes grounded for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they drained the startup's capital in court before they ever flew a single passenger.
And when they finally did get into the air, the legacy carriers engaged in predatory pricing, sparking vicious fare wars. There is the famous story from 1973 where Braniff slashed their Dallas to Houston fare to $13 just to bankrupt Southwest.
Right. And Southwest lacked the capital to sustain a $13 fare. They were pushed to the absolute brink. So instead of competing purely on price, Herb Kelleher offered customers a choice. Pay the $13 or pay the full $26 fare and receive a complimentary premium bottle of Chivas Regal, Smirnoff, or Crown Royal.
That is brilliant. They became the largest liquor distributor in the state of Texas for a few months. Business travelers expensed the full $26 fare to their companies and took the free bottle of whiskey home.
It was an act of rogue brilliance born of desperation. Furthermore, to avoid bankruptcy during those early years, they actually had to sell off one of their 4 aircraft just to make payroll. But they still had to maintain the exact same flight schedule to survive.
Wait, really? With one less plane?
Yes. The only physical way to fly a 4-plane schedule with 3 planes was to turn the aircraft around at the gate in 10 minutes.
Ah, the 10-minute turnaround wasn't an efficiency initiative. It was a matter of life and death. The pilots, the flight attendants, the baggage handlers all had to sprint to clean the plane and board the next flight.
Exactly. That shared trauma, that collective underdog fight for survival against massive corporate bullies, forged a bond of trust, urgency, and camaraderie among the employees that compounded over decades. A legacy carrier cannot hire a consultant to artificially induce 30 years of shared historical struggle.
Capital cannot buy an authentic origin story. The path they took makes the resulting cultural capability inimitable.
Exactly.
That is a phenomenal defense of history as a strategic asset. You can copy the processes, but you cannot copy the crucible that forged the team. What is the second barrier to imitation?
The second barrier is causal ambiguity. This condition arises when competitors, and remarkably often the executives within the successful firm itself, cannot definitively identify the exact causal mechanism linking the firm's resources to its competitive advantage.
If you cannot diagnose the engine, you cannot reverse engineer it.
Exactly.
Wait, take that logic one step further. You are suggesting a company could be generating billions in profit, dominating a sector, and the CEO sitting in the boardroom literally cannot explain exactly why they're winning. How does that pass an audit?
Well, it happens constantly, and the literature divides this ambiguity into 2 distinct types. The first is characteristic ambiguity, which is deeply rooted in the psychology of tacit knowledge.
Tacit knowledge, right?
Yeah, knowledge in a firm exists on a spectrum. Codified knowledge is a training manual, a software algorithm, a standardized recipe. It is easily documented and therefore easily stolen or copied. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is muscle memory. It is intuition.
It is the master chef who never measures ingredients but perfectly seasons the dish by scent and feel.
Exactly in that vein. Consider a highly successful buyer for a fast fashion empire. Year after year, they instinctively select the specific trends, colors, and silhouettes that will dominate the coming season. They consistently beat the market.
But if you ask them to write down the formula,
They cannot. Their capability is a complex, subconscious aggregation of observing street style, interacting with textile manufacturers, and a subtle gut feeling honed over 20 years.
because the expert themselves cannot codify the process into a set of instructions, it is fundamentally impossible for a rival firm to poach an apprentice and expect them to replicate the results. The characteristic of the knowledge defines imitation.
Right. And the second type is linkage ambiguity. This occurs in highly complex, mature organizations where an advantage is not derived from a single isolated resource, but from the invisible, intricate web of thousands of microprocesses operating simultaneously across departments.
It is the butterfly effect of corporate capability.
Yeah, exactly. The advantage might stem from a highly specific, idiosyncratic way the R&D engineers communicate with the marketing division, which is in turn influenced by the historical relationship the procurement team has built with a Tier 2 supplier in Taiwan.
So if a competitor attempts to copy the visible marketing strategy without perfectly replicating the other 900 invisible linkages, the strategy will fail. The sheer complexity of the web obscures the cause of the success.
Right. Causal ambiguity acts as a dense fog over the battlefield.
So we have path dependency and causal ambiguity. What is the final barrier protecting a valuable, rare resource?
The third barrier is social complexity. A capability may be deeply reliant on intricate interpersonal relationships, unique cultural norms, or a deeply entrenched reputation of trust with external suppliers and clients.
How does social complexity differ from the path dependency we discussed with Southwest?
Well, path dependency is primarily concerned with the historical timeline, how the capability was built over decades. Social complexity is concerned with the current, living human dynamics required to execute it today.
Ah, I see.
Think about highly advanced manufacturing. 2 competing aerospace firms might purchase the exact same state-of-the-art robotic assembly arms from the same vendor. The physical resource is identical.
The tangible noun is at parity.
But the firm that achieves a near-zero defect rate does so because of the social complexity on the factory floor. It is the mutual unspoken trust between the design engineer and the floor managers. It is the psychological safety that empowers a junior assembly worker to halt a multi-million-dollar production line because they sense a minor calibration error without fear of retribution.
You can deploy capital to purchase the robotic arms, but you cannot deploy capital to purchase trust, psychological safety, and interpersonal respect. Social phenomena cannot be systematically engineered or rapidly installed by management fiat.
Because it defies systematic management, it poses an insurmountable barrier to imitation. If a capability is valuable and rare, but it lacks these three barriers, meaning it has no path dependency, no causal ambiguity, and no social complexity, it is not costly to imitate.
The strategic result is a temporary competitive advantage. You will harvest excess profits for a brief window, but competitors will inevitably decipher the code, replicate the process, and drive your advantage back down to competitive parity.
Exactly.
Let us assume the absolute best-case scenario. A manager has shepherded a capability through the gauntlet. It is immensely valuable. It is verifiably rare. And due to a potent combination of tacit knowledge and decades of historical path dependency, it is entirely costly to imitate. They have satisfied V, R, and I. Is the fortress secure? Have they achieved a sustained competitive advantage?
They possess the raw potential for one, but they must clear one final critical adjustment factor. The letter O. Is the firm organized to capture the value of that capability?
Organized. We are moving from the abstract nature of the capability into the actual plumbing of the business.
Yeah.
What specific mechanisms constitute the O?
This is the execution phase. A firm must deploy the appropriate internal reporting structures, formal management control systems, and meticulously align compensation policies to actually exploit the capability. You can possess a VRI resource, but if the bureaucratic architecture of the company actively works against it, the value will bleed out.
Give me a tangible scenario where a company possesses the golden capability, but fails the organizational test.
Okay, imagine a massive legacy technology hardware conglomerate. Deep within their R&D division, a team of brilliant engineers develops a revolutionary proprietary software algorithm that drastically optimizes data storage. It is incredibly valuable, absolutely rare, and protected by patents and extreme causal ambiguity. It is a definitive VRI capability.
They hold the ultimate trump card.
However, the company's entire legacy sales force is exclusively compensated via commissions on selling heavy physical servers. The organizational reporting structure heavily silos the software engineers, denying them any direct communication with the marketing or sales divisions.
This is a disaster.
It is. Furthermore, the executive bonus metrics are tied entirely to quarterly hardware revenue, not long-term software licensing.
The plumbing is completely misaligned. The sales force has zero financial incentive to learn or pitch the new software, and the executives have no incentive to fund its commercialization. The structure actively strangles the innovation.
Right. The firm holds an unexploited advantage. They possess the capability, but their internal mechanics prevent them from capturing its economic rent. It is only when all four criteria align, when a capability is valuable, rare, inimitable, and the firm's structure, culture, and compensation metrics are actively organized to exploit it, that a firm achieves a sustained competitive advantage.
That is a remarkably rigorous diagnostic tool. It strips away the vanity and forces absolute honesty about internal operations. To solidify this, we need to apply the entire VRIO framework to real-world historical cases. We touched on Southwest Airlines regarding path dependency, but let's run their entire operation through the complete VRIO matrix to see how the variables interact.
Southwest provides a brilliant duality, actually, because we can test two very different capabilities within the same firm. First, let us evaluate their overarching organizational culture, the high energy, the employee focus, the frugality. Is that culture valuable?
Yes, it drastically improves operational efficiency and employee retention, directly lowering costs and driving consistent profitability.
Right. Is the culture rare? Yes.
Yeah.
The airline industry is historically plagued by toxic labor relations, frequent strikes, and deep-seated animosity between management and frontline workers. Southwest's collaborative environment is an extreme anomaly.
Is it costly to imitate?
Yes, as we detailed earlier, the culture is protected by deep path dependency forged during their existential legal and financial battles in the 1970s. It cannot be fast-tracked.
Finally, are they organized to capture its value? Absolutely. Their hiring practices prioritize attitude over aptitude. They famously mandate that executives spend time working on the tarmac loading baggage. Their profit-sharing compensation structures ensure that every employee benefits financially when the culture drives efficiency. The plumbing supports the capability perfectly.
Exactly. Value, yes. Rare, yes. Inimitable, yes.
Yeah.
Organized, yes. The result is a sustained competitive advantage spanning decades. But now, contrast that with a different capability Southwest pioneered, the high-speed, on-time arrival capability, specifically their famous 10-minute turnaround at the gate.
Let's run the turnaround through VRIO. Is the ability to turn a plane around rapidly Valuable, indisputably. An airplane only generates revenue when it is in the air. Minimizing gate time maximizes asset utilization and lowers unit costs.
Right. Is the rapid turnaround rare? When they first introduced and perfected it, yes. Legacy hub-and-spoke carriers were entirely unequipped to match the speed of Southwest's point-to-point network.
Now for the critical hurdle. Is the rapid turnaround costly to imitate?
And here the fortress crumbles. No, it is not. The turnaround is an operational process built on highly observable, tangible choices. Southwest flew only one type of aircraft, the Boeing 737, simplifying maintenance and crew training. They utilized unassigned seating to speed up boarding. They operated point-to-point routes rather than complex hubs.
There is zero causal ambiguity in a boarding process. A rival airline executive can literally buy a ticket, sit at the gate with a stopwatch and a notepad, and precisely document every single operational step required to turn the plane around.
Because the underlying resources are tangible and the process is entirely observable, it is fundamentally imitable. Therefore, the rapid turnaround capability, evaluated in isolation, only provided Southwest with a temporary competitive advantage. Rivals eventually observed, learned, and adopted similar processes.
That contrast brilliantly illustrates why intangible, socially complex capabilities like culture are exponentially more defensible than highly efficient operational procedures. A process can be timed, a culture must be lived. Let us shift from a sustained success to a spectacular failure. I want to return to the cold open of our discussion. The rise and catastrophic fall of Groupon is arguably the most vivid VRIO failure of the modern internet era.
Oh, for sure. Groupon's trajectory perfectly illustrates the danger of confusing rapid growth with sustained advantage. Founded in 2008, they pioneered the daily deals business model. They aggregated massive consumer demand via email lists and leveraged that demand to extract deep discounts from local merchants, taking a substantial cut of the revenue.
And the initial traction was terrifyingly fast. By 2010, they were generating hundreds of millions in revenue. Google, observing this, offered them $6 billion. They rejected it, went public at a $10 billion valuation, and were hailed as the future of local commerce. The market clearly believed they possessed a sustained competitive advantage. Let's run their model through the VRIO matrix. Were their capabilities valuable?
Yes. For consumers, the capability to aggregate steep discounts on local dining and entertainment was highly valuable. For merchants, the initial capability to drive hundreds of new customers through the door on a Tuesday night was perceived as highly valuable marketing.
Were their capabilities rare?
In the very early stages, yes. They amassed a subscriber base of over 50 million active users globally. Managing an engaged email list of that magnitude, localized by city, was a relatively rare digital asset at the time.
So we have valuable and rare. This brings us to the battlefield where the $10 billion valuation was ultimately destroyed. Were Groupon's resources and capabilities costly to imitate?
This was the pivotal debate. As their valuations soared, skeptical analysts and investors began probing the moat. The CEO, Andrew Mason, aggressively defended the company's inimitability. When confronted with the fact that thousands of clone sites are popping up, he argued that while the concept was easy to copy, the execution was protected by immense operational complexity.
Operational complexity. He pointed to the sheer scale of their physical infrastructure. He noted they had scaled to 10,000 employees across 46 countries. They had armies of young salespeople pounding the pavement in every major city, cold calling local spas, restaurants, and yoga studios to secure the deals.
Mason was essentially trying to claim a form of causal ambiguity and social complexity. He argued that managing an army of 10,000 local sales reps was so difficult and culturally complex that a competitor could not simply replicate it.
Did the market accept that defense?
The market violently rejected it, and the VRIO framework perfectly articulates why. Maintaining an army of 10,000 salespeople is undeniably expensive, but expense does not equal inimitability. Their capability completely lacked path dependency. They had hired those thousands of people in less than 2 years using brute force venture capital.
You cannot claim decades of historical path dependency when your company is only 36 months old.
Furthermore, it completely lacked causal ambiguity. The entire business model was entirely transparent. Raise venture capital, hire recent college graduates, give them a script, and mandate they make 100 cold calls a day to local merchants. There was no secret algorithmic sauce. There was no deep tacit engineering knowledge.
It was merely the aggressive application of tangible capital to purchase mobile human resources. And because the switching costs for merchants were practically zero, A restaurant could run a Groupon promotion on Monday and a living social promotion on Tuesday without any friction. The model was inherently vulnerable.
Which is exactly how the market reacted. Over 2,000 copycat platforms launched globally. Massive tech behemoths with deeper pockets, including Amazon and Google, simply launched their own localized daily deal services. Because Groupon's capability relied on tangible mobile resources cash and generic sales labor, it fundamentally failed the I in VRIO. It was, by definition, only a temporary competitive advantage.
The moment the novelty wore off and the merchants realized that discounted customers rarely returned at full price, the model collapsed. The stock plummeted, losing 80% of its value. Mason was ousted, and they retreated from international markets. It stands as a brutal reminder that a business model can be phenomenally difficult and expensive to build, yet still be incredibly easy to copy.
Difficulty of construction does not guarantee protection from imitation.
We have analyzed a culture that succeeded and a digital model that failed. Let us examine a scenario that highlights the sheer diagnostic power of the final letter O organization. I want to look at the internal audit of an iconic American manufacturer, Harley-Davidson.
The Harley-Davidson case is a fascinating application of VRIO for internal strategic course correction. Consider their position between 2015 and 2018. The company was facing severe headwinds. Revenue was declining, profitability was shrinking. If an executive solely relied on the old external five forces analysis, they would look at the demographic trends, the rise of alternative transport, and conclude that the heavy motorcycle industry was simply becoming an inherently unattractive market to operate in.
But the resource-based view demands we stop staring at the ocean and audit the ship. If we run Harley-Davidson's internal resources through VRIO, a completely different strategic picture emerges.
Yes.
Let us isolate a few key capabilities. What about their core manufacturing?
Is Harley's capability to manufacture heavy motorcycles valuable? Yes, the quality is high. Is it rare? No. The global market is flooded with world-class manufacturers: Honda, Yamaha, BMW, Triumph. Their core manufacturing only provides competitive parity. It is a threshold requirement to stay in business.
What about their intellectual property and brand?
Their engineering R&D and their brand image are deeply valuable. The Harley-Davidson brand is practically a religion for its core demographic. Is it rare? Absolutely. Is it costly to imitate? Yes. A Japanese competitor can reverse engineer the engine block, but they cannot reverse engineer 100 years of Americana, rebellious path dependency, and deeply ingrained cultural iconography.
So the brand and R&D are V, R, and I. Now let us examine their marketing capability. Harley is not just selling a vehicle, they're selling a lifestyle.
Their event-based marketing capability is legendary. They organize massive national rallies. They manage the Harley Owners Group, a profoundly loyal customer network. This marketing capability is valuable, it is incredibly rare, and it possesses intense social complexity, making it entirely inimitable. You cannot simply manufacture that level of tribal loyalty with a clever ad campaign.
Excellent. Their marketing capability is a VRI fortress. It sounds like they hold all the strategic cards. Why were their profits collapsing?
Because they were fundamentally failing the O organized to capture value. At that specific time, Harley-Davidson possessed this incredibly powerful, inimitable marketing engine, but the organization was directing it almost exclusively at their traditional legacy customer base, older, predominantly male riders.
The classic innovator's dilemma applied to marketing. Their core demographic was literally aging out of the physical ability to ride heavy motorcycles.
And internally, the organizational structure and culture were actively resisting a pivot. Dealerships, which operate as independent franchises, made their highest margins servicing the massive, expensive legacy bikes. The sales compensation structures were aligned with selling to the traditional base. Furthermore, there was a deeply entrenched cultural fear within management that aggressively marketing smaller, urban bikes to new demographics, younger riders, women, diverse urbanites, would actively alienate the legacy loyalists who valued the exclusivity of the brand.
The internal plumbing, the franchisee incentives, the cultural fear, the compensation metrics was completely misaligned with the potential of the capability. They possessed a VRI weapon, an unparalleled ability to build lifestyle brands, but they were organizationally paralyzed from pointing that weapon at the demographics that represented future growth.
That audit reveals the true power of VRIO. It did not merely confirm that Harley-Davidson was good at marketing. It surgically identified a massive, unexploited strategic opportunity. The diagnosis was clear. The external market wasn't entirely to blame. The internal organization was failing to exploit its own strengths. The strategic mandate was to reorganize the internal structures and incentives to capture the value of their brand across new markets.
It shifts the blame from the macroeconomic weather to the captain's decisions. We have traced the evolution from external analysis to internal resources, and we have thoroughly pressure-tested the VRIO framework. But I want to introduce a dose of skepticism here in our final segment. I want to play devil's advocate regarding the entire foundation of the resource-based view.
Please challenge the premise.
If I am a CEO and I commission a rigorous VRIO audit, and we successfully identify several capabilities that are valuable, rare, inimitable, and perfectly organized, can I declare victory? Can I simply maintain those resources, put my feet up on the mahogany desk, and let the sustained competitive advantage generate dividends into perpetuity? Because the most persistent critique of the resource-based view is that it feels remarkably static. It presents a brilliant, high-resolution photograph of what a firm owns at a specific moment in time. But business is not a photograph. Markets are fluid, technology accelerates, consumer preferences mutate. A static framework feels dangerous in a dynamic world.
That is the most potent and valid critique of the classical RBV. Simply possessing an arsenal of VRIO resources is inherently static. It represents potential energy. To quote a rather sharp observation from the strategic literature, customers do not mail checks to a company simply because the company possesses certain resources.
It is a brilliant point. I do not wire funds to a technology giant simply because I admire the depth of their patent portfolio sitting in a legal vault. I only pay for the tangible product they manage to produce from those patents.
Exactly the point. The value does not lie in the mere possession of the resource. The value is entirely derived from the dynamic deployment of the resource. And this realization has driven the latest evolution in strategic management, bringing us to the cutting edge of the discipline. It addresses the static flaw by integrating the classic VRIO theory with a dynamic, action-oriented mandate. This modern framework is known as resource orchestration.
Resource orchestration. The terminology itself implies movement, an active conductor harmonizing different sections of an orchestra. How does this framework shift the manager's role from merely hoarding resources to actively deploying them?
The resource orchestration framework, or RO, argues that sustained advantage requires continuous dynamic managerial action. It categorizes the essential role of the executive into three specific synchronized actions: structuring, bundling, and leveraging.
Let us dissect the conductor's movements. What does structuring entail in practice?
Structuring is the continuous, active management of the firm's overarching resource portfolio. It involves aggressively acquiring new capabilities from the external market, deliberately accumulating and developing knowledge internally over time, and, just as importantly, ruthlessly divesting resources that have lost their strategic value.
So structuring is the M&A strategy we discussed earlier. It is a targeted hiring of an AI engineering team. But it's also having the discipline to sell off a legacy manufacturing division that no longer aligns with the future. It's constantly upgrading the toolkit.
What is the second action?
The second action is bundling. This is the internal alchemy of the firm. Bundling is the managerial process of taking distinct, isolated resources and weaving them together to synthesize entirely new, complex capabilities.
Give me a concrete visualization of bundling. Return to Southwest Airlines. They possessed a fleet consisting of a single aircraft type. They possessed a highly motivated, cross-trained workforce. They possessed an unassigned seating protocol. In isolation, each of those is a resource or a simple capability. Bundling was the managerial genius of integrating those three distinct elements to synthesize the 10-minute turnaround capability. It is the act of combining ingredients to create a dish far more complex than the sum of its parts.
Structuring acquires the ingredients. Bundling cooks the meal. What is the third and final action?
Leveraging. This is the outward-facing aggressive deployment phase. Leveraging is the process of coordinating those newly bundled capabilities and deploying them directly into the market to exploit specific opportunities. It is the act of translating internal capability into external customer value and revenue.
Structuring, bundling, leveraging. Now, to prove this isn't just an elegant metaphor, we must examine the empirical data. We noted a massive 2021 meta-analysis by Doria and colleagues. A meta-analysis, for clarity, does not just run a single survey. It aggregates the statistical findings of hundreds of previous peer-reviewed studies to uncover the undeniable mathematical truths across an entire field of research.
The scale of the Doria study was monumental. They analyzed over 111,000 individual corporate observations across decades of literature. Their objective was to mathematically resolve the debate. Does financial outperformance stem merely from possessing strategic resources, or does it stem from the managerial actions of orchestration?
And what did that staggering volume of data ultimately prove? What drives the profit?
The data delivered a profound synthesis that bridges the classical theory with modern execution. It proved that possessing strategic resources is an absolute prerequisite, because possession enables the actions. If you do not possess high-quality resources, you have nothing of value to structure, bundle, or leverage. The data demonstrated a massive correlation. Firms with superior resource pools engage in far more aggressive orchestration.
So the VRIO resources act as the necessary fuel, but is simply hoarding the fuel enough to win?
Emphatically no. The meta-analysis definitively proved that it is the active synchronization of structuring, bundling, and leveraging that actually mediates and drives financial growth. When a management team executes these actions in isolation, they see marginal benefits. But when they synchronize them, when their structuring strategy deliberately feeds the raw materials for their bundling capability, which is immediately leveraged into a new market opportunity, that synchronized orchestration is the engine of outsized financial performance. The resources provide the potential energy, the orchestration provides the kinetic force.
That conclusion provides an incredibly satisfying resolution to the mystery we posed at the beginning of the session. It confirms that strategic dominance is not a passive state bestowed by the macroeconomic environment, nor is it merely a matter of accumulating a pile of assets. It requires relentless, dynamic execution. We have navigated a massive intellectual journey today, moving from the 1980s obsession with external industry structure through the paradigm shift of resource barriers, deep into the rigorous internal diagnostics of the VRIO framework, and finally arriving at the dynamic imperative of resource orchestration.
It represents a fundamental empowerment of the executive. It shifts the ultimate locus of control away from the unpredictable whims of the external market, placing the destiny of the firm squarely in the hands of its leaders and the unique, inimitable DNA they choose to build internally.
So, to synthesize this for your immediate reality, when you walk into your office next week, or when you sit down for your next quarterly strategy review, I challenge you to consciously invert your perspective. Resist the immediate urge to stare out the window. Stop agonizing over the latest moves by your competitors or attempting to predict macroeconomic tides you have absolutely no control over.
Direct that analytical rigor inward. Audit your own firm, interrogate your own team's capabilities, run the VRIO matrix on the processes you execute every single day. Strip away the vanity and identify what is genuinely valuable, what is actually rare, and what possesses the deep historical or social complexity to be truly inimitable.
And I want to leave you with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought to reflect upon. Consider a specific capability your organization possesses right now. Perhaps it is a notoriously eccentric but brilliant design team that has collaborated for a decade. Perhaps it is a vast, historically rich, but technologically fragmented customer database. Your intuition tells you it is immensely valuable, it is undeniably rare, and it would cost a rival millions to replicate. But confront the most difficult diagnostic question. Is your firm truly aggressively organized to capture its value? Are your compensation structures and reporting lines synchronizing to leverage it? Or are you, much like Harley-Davidson, hesitating to embrace a new demographic, sitting atop a massive strategic gold mine, passively waiting for someone else in the building to invent the right shovel?
That is the ultimate test of leadership. Identifying the gold is an intellectual exercise. Building the organizational machinery to continuously extract it is the essence of strategy.
A perfect summation. We hope this session of the Pocket MBA has equipped you with a sharper, more rigorous lens to evaluate your firm's true competitive advantage. Thank you for joining the discussion, and we look forward to unpacking the next strategic challenge with you soon. Goodbye.